Welcome to citiesabc.com series of interviews and profiling with leading global leaders, thought leaders, experts, and people shaping the world and creating new narratives and the projects for our world, our people, and our industry. citiesabc.com is a new wiki digital platform for citizens that intends to reinvent and unite cities, citizens, universities, leaders, entrepreneurs, and people that are creating empowering guidance and new solutions for the world we're facing and the world with a lot of challenges. Today, we have with us an amazing person that I deeply respect for all the things he's been achieving, but as well for his persistence and as well dynamics and creativity. Mamadou Toure, that is the founder of Africa 2.0, but as well involved in a lot of different things from the Ubuntu group and a lot of different other projects in terms of gathering a community of young leaders from Africa and the diaspora and pioneering and designing a proactive influencer network to drive a vision for Africa through the advocacy and create scalable impact initiatives. Mamadou, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Same here. It's an honor and a pleasure. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And congratulations for the great work you guys are doing.
No, I have to start with you. It's really amazing what you've been doing in the last years. And as well, the impact. I have a big passion for Africa, but I know that is not easy. And as well as the fast growing continent in the world, is the youngest population as well. So it's the future of mankind. So it's the past and the future. So
it's the past and the future. You know, everything has a cycle.
Exactly.
The beginnings.
So I would like to start by, so someone like you doesn't come by accident. So I would love to, I think especially one of the things I like always to hear in leaders and entrepreneurs like you is your background. Because if I'm a child in a village in Africa or in a village in Asia or whatever, or in Latin America, I like to know how Mamadou became Mamadou. And I think that story is very important as inspiration, but as well as the devil's on the details in the sense of explaining and motivating people.
No, thank you. Look, sometimes I wonder myself how Mamadou became Mamadou. I think the first thing is, if I can start where I was born, right? I was born in Cameroon in a very small, you know, not so wealthy area, if I may, and basically, you know, went to, you know, preschool and started elementary school there. You know, we were roughly 120 plus kids per class. You know, we didn't really have internet in those days, and after that. You know, I mean, while I was doing that, at some point, my father actually decided to go and try his luck in Europe. So my mom and I stayed behind, and I think he arrived in Germany and then France. And to be honest, you know, his let's say his permit expired. to put it, you know, with a bit of poetry. So you know, he wanted to, you know, he was passionate about music, so his parents didn't want him to do music, so he decided to go and work music in Europe, and he was working, you know, in different, you know, small bands to, you know, in cabarets and things like that to entertain, and then he could justify a job and he got his papers. And then he ended up having my mother to join him. And then I joined, you know, as part of what you call in French, le regroupement familial, which is, you know, in the early 80s, you know, with a lot of immigrants that were called to work, you know, to fill those gaps in jobs in Europe, and then they were allowed to bring their family around across, which I was part of that whole, I would say, caravan, if I may. So a defining moment, I would say, when I was in school was when I was in high school. At the end of junior high school, the principal called my parents and told them, your kids shouldn't stay in school. And my mom, it was not easy to be a black family, let's say, at the time in Europe, right? From an immigrant family, let's say. So my mom was always a bit.
It was in Germany?
It was in France, in Paris.
In Paris, yeah.
In Paris suburb, right? So basically, and then she thought, okay, why don't you want my child to not to stay in the school? He's top of his class and he's turbulent, but it's not a reason to fire him. And the principal said, no, it has nothing to do with that. Your child is bored, and I think he needs to be in an environment that stimulates him, intellectually, etc. So there was this school in Paris called Lycée Bulle-Legrand. You might have heard of it, where, which is basically the best high school, I think, in France, and where many, let's say, French leaders and Nobel Prize came from. So I was sent there. I think I was probably the only, let's say, sub-Saharan African at the time. And it was a great experience for me because I was surrounded by a lot of bright minds from across Europe, mostly, whose parents would have sent there. Very, very, indeed stimulating. And that's also where when I realized how privileged I had been. If I look back at where I was coming from, to the environment I found myself in now, from a very humble background in the middle of a third world country, and a few years later to be among some of the prime elite of Europe, if I can, the prime upcoming elite.
The world,
yeah. Yeah, the world in many ways, yeah. So, because basically there, we were targeting either the Fields Medal or, you have a lot of, that was the mindset, so it was very interesting. And then I thought I had a huge responsibility because I was extremely lucky to have been given that chance, and to also have had some people along the journey who saw the potential and believed in me. And as an African, for me, I told my mom that, it was very interesting to see what they were doing. And she said, if you remember when you arrived in France as a child, you were so impressed by the level of development, infrastructure, lifestyle. And you told me a few hours after landing that one day you'll go back to Africa and you'll make sure it looks just like that. So it was quite an interesting moment. So I continued my journey, as a student, but school was still boring, to be frankly honest. At least the way it was, even if academically it was going well, but I thought that was not enough for me. So at 19, I started my first non-for-profit organization. That was called Afrique Tandem. And the idea, still based on that idea of giving back, was to gather young African students across Europe in this organization to work together in doing skills transfers back to Africa, and also empower and accompany young students that would be arriving in Europe, so that we could create a bit of a collective working on really giving hope, but also accelerating at our level the development of the continent. So I was doing that in parallel to my activities as a student. So I did class préparatoire, and then French grande école, as they call it. I decided to focus on business, although I did love math and science. Because I believe that the real gap was in leadership. Once you get the right type of leadership, then you can get science, technology, and everything else to flourish. So went to business school, majored in finance, and So we did actually with that, so I was carrying on that activities with those African students across Europe, and we did the first ever career forum for African diaspora to go back to Africa and work in in African companies or multinationals, so that we could give them the opportunity to go back and share their knowledge, their skills, and help their continent develop. So I was kind of, again, having this double life, at school during the day, and it's been a very much of a pattern, I have to say. We'll get to that later. Basically, it grew to have like 200 plus students across Europe, mainly coming from some of the best universities and schools, etc., and really working towards not only giving back, but start putting the premises of a knowledge-based society. Really, that was in the late 90s. No, let's say the early 2000s, late 90s, right? And internet was very nascent then, right? So when we kind of built libraries in Mali, other African countries, we also started sensitizing people around e-commerce even before it got big. So we could see that that would be the chance for craftsmen, small manufacturers, artists, to get the world to know their talent by using the internet and using e-commerce as a way. And we did like training and entrepreneurship competitions around internet and technology for Africa to embrace this new world. After I graduated, I mean, I was actually very much passionate, even before graduating, about telling the African story. I'm sure you would remember that article of The Economist that basically got all of us outraged about the hopeless continent. The whole idea for us was to say, no, the continent is not hopeless. Actually, the continent is the hope of humanity in the next decades, for the very reason that we have the youngest population, 60% of arable land, and also some strong values that the Western world might have forgotten along the way, and that would become very handy when S hit the fan, if I may. So, which was based on the sense of community, the sense of Ubuntu that I actually discovered myself later without knowing that I was practicing it, right? So started working with KPMG in Paris. Was a very good experience, and it was mostly audit banking, and financial services institutions. So it really, really allowed me to go deep and understanding how the banking sector work, how the financial institutions, insurance, etc., are structured from within. And it turned out to be handy, let's say 2 decades later when I got into blockchain, right? So that was the early 2000s. So after that, I was craving more to be involved in development. Actually kind of was split between joining some non-for-profit organization in Asia or Latin America, like Action contre la faim or other, NGOs helping alleviating, human crisis, whether it would be, related to conflict or related to famine, actually, right? And then finally, I decided that I wanted to make more of a structural change than a topical change. So, and with my background, I would have more impact on having a structural impact. So, with a finance background and a master in finance, etc., many of my friends from that major actually went to work with Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, and so on. And I wasn't so tempted, although there was, the opportunity was there. I thought first I didn't have much of a focus on development or emerging markets that were not, let's say, mature enough. But I still wanted to have an impact through investments and through advisory. And at the time, BNP Paribas, Fortis then, who were acquired by BNP Paribas, had this Africa division. So I decided, to join them. And it was a very, very good experience because that's when I realized that I could do government advisory, help on privatization, sector restructuring, but I also could do mergers and acquisitions, helping large multinationals expand into Africa, but also helping African emerging leading entrepreneurs like at the time Nico Raitare, or we also worked with Negip Seweris from Morascom, and one in particular also that we worked with was Mo Ibrahim, who founded Celtel that you might have heard of. And the one that is probably most renowned that I worked closely with, as an advisor with our firm and helped him structure his first large project was Aliko Dangote, right? So, and it was a time where, Africa was barely getting into the scene, the international scene as an attractive investment destination. And there was a need that was fairly obvious in terms of accompanying those governments. It was after the structural adjustment plans from IMF, World Bank, and so on. So spent quite a few years traveling across the continent and around the world, actually, talking to investors, raising capital for projects, and so on. And on the one that we're working on with Aliko Dangote on his cement plant, Obajana, we got IFC, the World Bank, actually interested. So we went to Washington, made a presentation, and then after that, the World Bank actually approached me, and which was the director at the time, Thierry Tano, and his team offered me to join the World Bank and IFC in particular, because they had set some great ambitions for Africa, and they wanted people like me to join them. So I went to Johannesburg, to the head office. So I was basically working mostly in Johannesburg, but spending a lot of time in Washington at the headquarters. And when I went to board that plane, I remember my mother telling me, "So your childhood dream, it looks like it's coming along. You're going back to Africa, and you're going to be working on development, etc." I said, "Hey, I don't know, but it looks like at least I was true to myself, And yeah, I landed in Johannesburg. How much detail do you want? Because I could go for hours, huh?
No. No, it's actually very inspiring.
10 minutes.
Okay, no, it's okay. No, summarize this.
Anyway, you'll
actually.
cut, right? You'll edit.
No. So far, there's nothing to cut. It's wonderful. Continue.
Okay. Yeah,
very inspirational.
So started working with IFC. Very, very impressive organization, of course, a strong development mandate. And I did, a lot of projects. In the beginning, you do a bit of everything, so agriculture, infrastructure. And then I decided to focus on telecom media technologies. Why? For the simple reason that if I looked at my background, right, I also understood that not every child will ever necessarily have that opportunity to be taken on a flight and land in Paris and, get the best kind of education in the world and the kind of access I got. So how do we create a level playing field? How do we make sure that everyone get equal opportunity regardless of their wealth at birth or their location at birth, right? So, and technology for me was that equalizer. Technology and telecommunications and education and content were that very opportunity that could make sure that you don't get penalized because of the color of your skin, the origins of your parents, and the land you were born in, right? So I decided to focus on that, telecom media technologies, with IFC and with a mandate, with a development mandate, right? And so as I did that, what was very interesting is that it was the beginning of, so I was part of the early wave of GSM telecommunications, right? Because we basically were advising or raising capital for some of the first telecom licenses in Nigeria with MTN, in many other countries where we basically had to demonstrate to the world when we were pitching it, right? And even before IFC, when I was with BNP Paribas in Paris, that actually Africa will leapfrog. And nobody believed us, right? Because so when I would do the whole business plan and the financial model based on assumptions and scenarios, I would go and see some of those big banks or investors in Europe, in America, in the Middle East, and said, okay, we think this country will go to 10% penetration, which means, let's say, go from 0 to 500,000 subscribers in the next 7 years, right? And everybody were like, look, Africa, this country is barely at, let's say, 100,000 fixed lines, and it did that in 30 years. How do you expect, them to reach 500,000 subscribers in 7? Which is, and I explained that it's the question of opportunity and convenience, right? And of course, so it was hard to raise the capital because there was an asymmetry of information, but reversed, in the sense that we knew the market, we knew what the customers and the people needed phones, because that was the only way to get access, not only to information, but to communicate and trade. So it was a life condition for them. Guess what? After 7 years, our provisions actually were multiplied. So if instead of 500,000, they were at 4 million, right? In most countries, it was 4 times exceeding whatever anybody would have expected. And also because the informal economy is not accounted for at all. So it was a very interesting experience, and I understood then that if we bring technology, people will adopt, right? And why will they adopt is because it's their chance to escape poverty, right? If you create opportunities for people through technology, then it becomes a lifesaver, right? Regardless of the government policy or anything. So as we did that, the next wave for me that I could see coming was mobile money, right? Because at the time, and it was like early 2000, 2004, 3, 4, 5, moving money was a challenge, right? The banking penetration was a problem. It was a cash economy, and you would need like literally cases of cash to make transactions in many places. And there was no infrastructure and quality of roads, etc. So banking the way we knew it, in my opinion at the time, will not fly. You needed to digitize this whole thing, especially that everybody now had many people had a mobile phone, right? And today we're talking about 89% of adults who have a mobile phone. and you're talking about a smartphone penetration in the next 4 years that will reach 3/4 of the population, right? So they have a laptop now. Everybody will have a laptop on their phone. But then point was, how do you effectively transact? How do you, you know, have a chance to send money to someone that is at 100 kilometers without having to wait 3 days for the bank to process it, knowing that you don't even have a bank account? So mobile money. And I made the first investment in the world actually in mobile money. And I was involved in the very early days with the M-Pesa management team when they were starting the project, right? And that for me was a great experience because it was the second time I was proven right.
Oh, fantastic. So
in terms of understand, sorry?
No. Keeping on that, and I'm particularly interested. So you have this history, and it's a fantastic life story, and I think as well very inspirational. But so when you came back to Africa,
Yeah.
and I think this is important to right now probably go into the part 2. So when did you decide to start your main projects like Africa 2.0? It was exactly at that time, because you are still
Yes,
in the bridge between in corporate and investor, and as well social impact.
Exactly. Yeah. So that was the exact time. It was a bit later actually, when I understood that actually technology alone will not solve it.
Yes, that's very important.
Right. And once again, I was back to this conclusion that you need to have the right environment and you need to have vision and leadership, right? And it was also at the time where I was getting a bit frustrated with the World Bank in many ways, right? With the group and with some perception and I won't call it the Washington consensus, but something not too far from that, in the sense that I didn't believe that there was only one way and a one-size-fits-all to address the problems of development. I believe that development should be and could be solved through a co-creation model where stakeholders come together and actually provide solutions that are adapted to the environment. So then I decided, okay, there's a lot of talents on this continent. We need to do something. And guess what? You had the World Cup in South Africa at the time, right? So it was the African World Cup. And a few months, 4 months before, everybody was calling me because and those were all the contacts I'd met across my career, right? So some CEOs, some head of funds, some young also leaders, etc., who would know me as the point of contact and would say, okay, can you get me tickets? Can you get me a hotel? And I said, okay, guys, I'm not a travel agent, but if you guys are going to be coming all here, then let's make something about it, right? I think it's not every day that we have so many bright minds that are going to be located in one, that are going to be concentrated in one location. So let's get together. You can still watch the game, but let's look at what are the problems that Africa is facing and how can we work together to solve them. And then they actually like the concept, right? Then I started organizing this conference in margins of the semifinal and finals. That was an itinerant conference where we would all gather. At the time also, I had the great support, I have to say, from Graça Machel in particular, who really believed in the responsibility of the next generation and empowering them. So she helped tremendously. Nelson Mandela also was really encouraging. I was lucky and privileged to have met him, and he really loved he and his wife really loved what we were doing. A few leaders in South Africa, like Trevor Manuel, came to inaugurate our forum. Also Mampele and Geoff Rothschild also, who was the head of government affairs at the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. So we had business, we had politics, we had civil society, and we have entrepreneurs that were all gathered to say, okay, what are the key problems that this continent is facing? How can we unlock it? And we would do the conference and then go and watch the games, right? Either on TV or in the stadium. We didn't all get tickets, but that's a side story. And then after the final, we looked at Spain won, if you remember, right? And then we gathered the next day and said, okay, now we have identified all the problems of this continent, at least the most pressing issues, right? So we need a vision. We need a vision that will tackle those issues and propose a key action plan to be executed to really unlock the potential of the African continent. So we gathered and we said, okay, then we're going to need, it's nice to have those ideas, but we can't just stop here. We need a vehicle that's going to be driving that vision and be a think tank that does things that will ultimately, help be that agent of change across the continent, because we do have the access, we have the knowledge, we have the network, and we're willing to put time to this. So what are we building? The next version of Africa. So what name should we have? Africa 2.0, Africa 2.0. That's how it started. And then we decided that we needed to articulate that vision into a manifesto. So we worked, the different members worked from 60 different locations to basically draft that manifesto. Everyone had their sections, sub-teams, etc. So that was the beginning of a Google Doc on paper, if I may, right? So, and then we produced that manifesto collectively, we reviewed it, and then went to present it after a year and a half after we started the initiative. We went to present it at the African Union. So we had a delegation going and presenting and requesting that it's important for Africa to have an agenda and a vision that we can all gather around and drive. So we engaged with heads of states, decision makers. We also presented in Davos at the World Economic Forum. And the vision was basically based on some key pillars, and more importantly, on some cross-cutting themes in terms of who is going to drive it: the youth, women, diaspora, and technology. And one was about uplifting Africans, second about upgrading infrastructure, third was about promoting an enabling environment, and fourth was about One Africa, United Africa, right? And 2 years later, I mean, we had our conference maybe 6 months later after presenting it to the leaders. And then the African Union actually sent a delegation to our next gathering. And 2 years later, the African Union officially presented Agenda 2063, that was basically a vision for Africa over the next decades. I was ratified later on by the African heads of states. So that was the first victory for us. One of the key recommendations.
What was the date? What was the date on that? Just going.
It was in 2014, if my memory is correct. Let me check. Yeah.
So we'll pick it up towards.
So yeah, but it was 3 years later. So 2014, 2015. So it's been proposed in 2014 and ratified in 2015. Right. And that was a very good experience, because it was, I mean, that was one of our first victory. But even before that, the manifesto was approved by 43 ministers of education from 44 countries. That was a year after we published it.
That's impressive, yeah.
So that was a real journey, and one of the key things that recommended in our manifesto was the Africa Free Trade Area, and it was a very important point for us. And basically, in 2018, actually, I finally saw the launch of the African Continental Free Trade Area, ratified by 26 countries. And as of December 2019, 54 out of 55 countries ratified the treaty, making Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement the largest trade area and landmass in the world.
That's impressive. So Ken, let's speak on that, because I think that's very important, because that is not so well known in the Western world. And I think it's bearing in mind that Africa definitely is going to be the biggest. Well, geographic is already massive, but as well in terms of population, in terms of young population. So how would you see now that you achieve that political massive victory, which is still very recent because 2014 and 2019 we're still very fresh, and now we are going as well through a massive challenge with COVID-19 and all these things. So how are you seeing right now the political work? And I love that you've been always looking at the vision, the structure, but as well put it in practice, and as well the technology, which is it's an important thing that even in Europe, most of our leaders, they don't know anything about technology. And actually it's a big challenge. So we have to have the 3 or 4 things aligned. So how you
Yeah.
see that right now, that work of both your work in Africa 2.0, but as well right now going from the theory to make it practice?
So, what is important, you mentioned the combination of both, is that we actually used what we are made for as Africans. And we come from a cultural point of view. And that has somehow been a bit disrupted during colonization, of course, but is that at our very essence, we believe and live Ubuntu. And where the collective is the key to the success of the individual, and where the role of the individual is to act as part of that collective, right? So the manifesto itself and the strategy and the advocacy strategy of Africa 2.0 was based on a social contract between stakeholders, so that it's something that we all believe in and that we can all push, right? And technology, of course, is key. So the next step for us, and when it comes to that, is to continue keeping that very model, because we're also seeing the limits of an individualistic based approach, right? And we believe that with all the crises coming and spreading, etc., it has highlighted our interdependence. And that's why we're launching this Ubuntu Love Challenge, in the sense that we need to remember that what we share is a DNA and a planet, whether we want it or not, right? And as such, we have a responsibility, and there is an intrinsic interconnection among us that makes our humanity to co-create or to destruct, right? And that consciousness needs to come back in the forefront, right? You know, like the long term for the community versus the short term for the individual. So what we think also is that we're going to need to go back to what value system do we want for the world of tomorrow. And I think this COVID-19 invites us, and we've had those conversations with the members of Africa 2.0, but also beyond the African region. For instance, Sheikh Abodur Al-Hassimi, who is launching and working with me on this Ubuntu Love Challenge initiative, is also a strong proponent of this new philosophy and those new values. And we see that actually when you're human, it actually makes sense if you go deep inside. So as we're transitioning, and as this COVID-19 has been an eye-opener for all of us about the necessity to address, first recover intrinsic power, because we do have, anybody has the capacity and can be defined in 4 things: by what we think, basically what we think or know or believe in, right? The second one, we define also by our actions, what we do and the legacy we leave in a lifetime, and what we do to others. We've thirdly defined by our emotions, how we feel and how we make people feel. The fourth element, and across any place in the planet, is also we are defined by our network, our family, our colleagues, our friends, our country, city, community, region. So it means that anybody, regardless of their wealth or knowledge, can bring something to the table. There is no subhumans here. If we finally understand that, and you can see it, we are moving to a data-driven society. Now, guess what? if you are, let's project in 2030 or 2050. 2050, you have a planet with basically 2 billion Africans. And out of it, 7 out of 10 youth will be from Africa. If you need data, where are you going to go? Even if they're poor as hell, you're going to need data. So the rules are changing and are being redefined. And the question that everybody is being asked now is, do we want to carry on like this? Or should we should we take a step back and rethink the world we want to build and the direction we want to take collectively, right? And so in the case of Africa 2.0, our immediate action now is, what should we do post-COVID-19? And we've prepared a report that we'll be sharing actually next week to decision makers and to anybody who wants to get it. And it's been combined, it's been it's a compilation of contributions from different of our members across the continent. And it's people like you and I, but also you have farmers, entrepreneurs, advisors, professionals, who all have their own realities on the ground and can provide solutions. I think the solutions of tomorrow will not be decided in between closed door at the 33rd floor of a building, right? And that's where I think we're seeing, because we all more and more interconnected with internet, right? So, and we've made a key list of recommendations that we're going to be sharing. And I think the point is everybody can contribute, and those contributions are homegrown solution, right? No one size fits all, and that are adapted to some realities. And actually, we believe there are a lot of opportunities that can come out of this crisis if we ask ourselves the right question and review some fundamentals.
So on that level, do you see this manifesto as the Ubuntu Love Challenge, or that is a separate initiative?
No, it's separate. So actually the manifesto that we produced was 10 years ago for Africa 2.0, but the new report that Africa 2.0 has produced is more Africa focused, right? The Ubuntu Love Challenge is more a way to remind people that if we give into fear, right, we are basically lowering our vibrations and get more vulnerable, not only to the virus, but also more inclined to fall into hopelessness, right? While if we adopt the energy, the vibration, and the mindset of love for one another, love for self, and understanding the importance of our interconnectedness, we have much more chances to overcome this global challenge. So what we aim at doing with the Ubuntu Love Challenge as a phase 1 is to create an environment where people could show an act of kindness, proof of interdependence and solidarity around them, because we are fully aware that the consequences of this pandemic in the terms of socio-economic results will be really damaging. And there's a need for preparedness, and there's a need for global collaboration from the grassroots up, right?
So I want to, sorry, interrupt, but I think on that level, I love especially the concept of Ubuntu, but as well, you've been talking, and all your work, and as well the work of Africa 2.0 is this sense of creating a narrative that is about hope and interconnectedness, but as well solutions. So how do you see right now, especially in the Western world, we're seeing a big questioning of leadership and a lack of narratives that are more positive. If you see, most of Europe is very divided. The US, I'm not going even to talk about it. And then, of course, there's a blame game in all these things. And I think Africa, like you mentioned, you are one of the leaders as well, as a huge voice, because like you said, 2 billion people, the young people in the world, the data is going to come from there, and as well the innovation. For instance, so Jack Dorsey recently just is moving actually
It's
to
moving to
Africa.
Africa.
So
Yeah,
how
you
do you
probably
see
saw the
this?
pandemic coming.
Yeah, yeah. But how do you see the so from a practicality? Because I think in the end of the day, like you said, we vision without action. It's well, it doesn't
Yeah,
really do anything. But as well,
it's pointless.
you touch technology and blockchain. So how are you trying to look at these things together? Because this is very important if you put things together, but as well if you make tools for people to use.
Okay, so here is blockchain for me. Let's go back a bit to history. Yeah, what internet did, it disrupted knowledge. What e-commerce did, it disrupted industries. If you think of Amazon and so on, what blockchain will do will be to disrupt economies. Why? Simple. If you have today the opportunity to provide full traceability of a product, right? If you can do a transaction without a center party whose integrity could be questioned, if you have the opportunity to basically also have access to anyone in the world and transact with anybody in the world without any kind of restriction, then if you also have the opportunity to be able to raise capital from anywhere in the world and not just through centralized institutions, by giving comfort that your business is run on the blockchain and that the data that you're providing are accurate, immutable, you disrupt economies and you give an equal opportunity for anyone to actually compete. And that's why I think blockchain is going to be critical in the decades to come. And that's why we decided to launch Ubuntu Tribe, right? And Ubuntu Tribe came from this very simple idea, right? As you know, I'm from Africa. And at the end of the day, it's probably, if not the richest, I'd say one of the richest continent in the world. But yet, people see us as poor, right? There's a mismatch.
Yes.
Now, how do you address this mismatch? Let's say we got 40% of the gold reserves, we got diamonds, oil, you name it. Wood, land, we poor. Okay, leadership didn't help. International geopolitics didn't help, fine. But what if we made those resources a currency? What if we said, okay, I have gold, instead of me just selling it and you give me paper that might depreciate because I have, let's say, Ghana cedis or South African rands, or then no, I'll give it to you and we'll trade out of it, right? Then I'll make the actual gold or the reserves, you know, or the other assets a trading element, you know, a medium of exchange. That's a game changer. So that's what we did with Ubuntu Tribe. It's like, there's another thing about gold. It's like, it's concentrated in a very limited number of hands. Nothing wrong with that. But what if we also allow others to access it? So we've digitized gold in a way to democratize it so that anybody can access it for 5 cents, including Africans, Asians, Europeans, anyone. Now, in the context of a big crisis, 5 cents might mean a lot. And in the context of big crisis, gold has always gained significant value. So maybe it's a cushion that we're working on to alleviate some of the big things that might come across down the road. You know, if there's no infrastructure, then you might want to go digital. If infrastructure is broken, for a natural catastrophe or because we all locked in on a lockdown, you still want to transact, right? So we've created Ubuntu Tribe in that vision of creating an environment based on digital asset investment and trading for a shared economy, borderless, where what is in your soil actually has value because it always had, but it hasn't necessarily always reflected. For those who can't have proper savings, right? For those who struggle to access digital education across all those emerging markets, they don't have a credit card, but what if they could pay in digital gold that they just get on their phone? It changes everything, right? Now, everybody has a right to education. Payment is no longer a barrier. And why gold is interesting is that it's that one metal that anybody in the world is willing to take. So I'm hearing that some of those great powers also might be considering to go back to the gold standard. So let's see how it goes.
So on that level, sir, I want to touch that because that's a very important thing. Because I think this is a challenge that is not just for Africa; it's for the rest of the world. And I think, to be honest, I think Africa
Ubuntu
can
tribe
lead
means,
this. Yeah, it can lead
Ubuntu
this.
tribe means the human tribe. Ubuntu tribe means the
exactly.
human tribe. Yeah. Ubuntu means humanity. It's a gift from Africa to the world to make it better.
No, and I think peaking on that level, and I think your experience in leadership, I know that is focused mostly in Africa, but one of the challenges we're facing, if you look at the US,
I'm a young global leader with the World Economic Forum, though.
Exactly, I know.
We do a lot of work together. So in 2015, I was. So there's a lot of global
I didn't mention
work.
that, but yeah. So one thing on that, I know that you're working with the World Economic Forum, with World Bank, and a lot of these things. But one of the things that is happening, if you look at the world economy, is that this challenge right now is completely global. Okay, so if you look at, there's 26 million employees in the US. It's official numbers. There's probably, I think, 1 in 6 people in the UK, for instance, are right now furloughed. That means they are supported by the government. And if you look at the rest of the world, of course, Africa doesn't have this infrastructure even, but has other challenges. But the challenge is that this is kind of, first of all, highlighting, like you said, the technology, the digital challenge, but as well the opportunity to really come up with a better, like you said, preparedness to get into this. So how are you trying to take this? Because this is something that I think everyone should look at your experience, but as well, we need to repeat the message. Education comes from the Latin word repetere, that gave the word repeat in English, but the idea of repeating the message, and I think this is a very important thing, and I want to highlight this because probably if you look at the technology and these things to create digital assets, digital education, we might be able to leapfrog. And I think Africa doesn't have the legacy system, so it can go much faster and rebuild things from the scratch, because they don't need to be going through 10 years or 20 years of different technologies. They don't talk with each other and so forth. So have you started already putting things on that together? This is one of our visions as well for this project.
So that's the whole point, right? So the ultimate goal of Ubuntu Tribe is make sure that we can enable united, prosperous, and enlightened global society. This is critical for us. And what the points you made in terms of poverty and employment, it's exactly that, right? So we've been working on a platform and we're looking for partners. So maybe we should definitely talk, right? Where we could have this opportunity for anybody on the planet or on the internet who want to imagine the new world to actually come and co-create it, right? And the experience from Africa 2.0 has been very, very helpful because we've been able to achieve significant results at a time where there was no blockchain, there was limited bandwidth, etc. Right? So now we have all the tools from a technology point of view, and we have that global problem that is forcing all of us to rethink, to ponder, reevaluate, and rebuild. Unfortunately, in human history, if you look, right, there's been always a need for a crisis for people to awaken. First World War, Society of Nations, Woodrow Wilson. Second World War, United Nations, Bretton Woods institutions. Hopefully we're not in a world war, and hopefully we don't get into one. Yep. And let's not wait for one to happen to wake up. And this work that I've been doing with Ubuntu Tribe and with the Ubuntu philosophy, inspired to me by people like Nelson Mandela, to be frankly honest, right? And by staying in South Africa. And also, if you look at Ubuntu, forgive me the digression, you have the same word in Kinyarwanda, in Rwanda, that says Umubuntu. That means the humans. Utu in Swahili, that means a humanity. Abatu in the Lingala, that means the humans, right? So that's what it means. And I think what we've been called upon is that the world needs those values today. Let's go back to our humanity, right? Let's go back to this very essence of what keeps us together. So let's hope, and the preparedness for me, I started it in maybe 10 years ago with Africa 2.0, and to prepare, how do you get 55 countries to go in one direction by just getting a bunch of young leaders to come up with ideas and suggestions? How do you get 100 and 3, 4, 5, 600 people to push in a direction that could influence 1.2 billion? And I think that's the credit, and I need to give that to my team and to those who believed, right? And that's somehow, we can't claim the full credit for all those decisions, but we certainly know we've had an influence. And I think at global scale now, it might be that time to come with solutions and start co-creating, right? And
so
yeah.
No, this is amazing, and as you mentioned, as you saw, I'm quite excited about this because I really believe on this. And actually, for instance, my last book, there was 4AR, blockchain AI and IoT and fintech, how to reinventing nations, came out of my frustration and as well the lack of understanding technology as tools, like you said, to co-create. And I think I love the focus on co-create. So how, let's say someone that is out here in the UK, there's a huge communities, multi ethical communities, a lot of Africans that we have all over the world. So how do you see right now, let's say, young leaders around the world that are interested to come to Africa 2.0 or even to join Ubuntu Tribe? What would be your message? Because we need this leadership that you are showing, but we need to get it bigger on digital. Because for instance, if you see right now, and I want to be provocative in a good way with you, if you see people like Bill Gates, they have more followers than sometimes governments. And even for instance, you work with the World Economic Forum, they do a fantastic work on social media. And you have to have the messaging, the tools, but then you have to have the capacity to put it in practice, which is not easy. Building technology and make it happen is not an easy task. So how do, probably just provoking you, but as well trying to show this to the rest of the people that are listening to this, or they will listen to this interview, and as well want to know about your project, about you, about different things?
So my answer is, I'll go back to technology, right? What you've seen over the past, so we are actually experiencing a very new generation globally, is the open source generation, right? So what is happening, and I'm seeing it even with you guys, right, is that you do have a lot of people separately working on different kind of projects, right? And many of them have adopted this idea that they will make their project open. So we're moving from the closed world, behind closed doors, so with a lot of mystery, to a world, and you can see it's the same for blockchain, to more an open world where everybody comes and contributes something. The Ubuntu is already there, right? Actually, that's the reason why Linux hold a platform like that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So, and what I see coming, really, it's going to be we entering in an epoch or era of decentralized collective response to some global challenges and to some alliances of like-minded people sharing the same values at thousands of kilometers away, but coming together to work on a common problem. And this is, I think, is the hope of our society of the world for the next coming years. Because, you know, Bill Gates might have millions of followers, but a couple of billion people might share the same vision and idea.
No. I just use this as an example.
And then they co-create. Yeah. No. I know perfectly. So and might just come once you have that thing that drives them, which is change or progress. Then you let human creativity express itself organically. But you need that one thing that rally all of them. And you have two ways to unite the people: a common enemy or a common goal or ambition. The first one is easy to do. You can construct it. You can build and construct an enemy. An ideal is harder to take down. So if there is that ideal or that dream, common world, common vision coming out, you can have differences about how it's being done, but you can be united about the need to see it happen.
And I completely, and that's coming back to Nelson Mandela. So one of the things that I loved, I did a lot of research about him, and one of the things that he made that really unites South Africa was precisely the sports. So unite people through
the rugby.
The rugby, but as well the idea
they were not good enough at football by then.
No, but it was no, I understand.
Sorry, I'm from Cameroon. You know, football is a religion back then.
No, you guys are very good.
I had to pick my South African brothers.
No, but that point precisely for us, the idea of the sports, the idea of things like you said, because at the
sports,
moment,
culture, music.
Exactly the point. Yeah, and your father is a musician, so yeah.
My dad is a musician, and very young, very early. So I used to do. I was maybe a bit of a non-traditional kid, but I used to do my homework in studio just to be with my dad, right? So, but I've learned one thing very young is the power of frequency. The power of emitting a vibration that can affect human emotions. Very young. And once you understand those things, it helps you a lot. And now you understand the power of music. Now you understand the power of sports, right? Let me give you an example that many people don't know. Bob Marley, actually, it's a friend of mine, DJ Morita, who works with Kool and the Gang, who shared that story with me. So at the time in Kingston, there was two major factions, right? Like ready to kill each other, ready literally to kind of end with one another. So, but they did love that artist. He decided to do a concert, but people said, you know, they're gonna shoot you. You're risking your life because, you know, this is not done and your lyrics and this and that, you know. And he said, look, I'll go on stage because I might as well die spreading love. And what was very powerful in what he did, he had the two leaders of both factions holding their hands and holding hands under that one song. One love, one heart, let's get together and feel all right. So yes, the power of frequency, the power of vibration. And I have hope.
No, I love that. That's actually beautiful. So in terms of we're passing 1 hour, but I want to just one or two more questions if you are still time. So I
Sure.
think this is actually critical because I think we're losing this. I think at the moment we have, I think,
That's
especially in
exactly the
leadership,
point.
yeah, it's and I think you would be good for you to as well position that more visible, more louder, and more repeating because we need definitely that. I think if you see the news at the moment, the mainstream news is really very negative. It's like you said, focus on the common enemy that is blaming people for things, and especially because of some leaders we have. But coming back to the more hope vision, which I love from you, and I think which you are doing as well in action. So coming back to Africa 2.0, to the initiatives like the Ubuntu tribe, which is a wonderful vision. How are you right now going into the practice? And I think this is where entrepreneurs, technology people, like I said, the billions of people that are silent, and they're the ones actually doing things and uniting, helping communities. How can you, how are you seeing as well from your experience, uh, creating common goals for 55 countries? Can right now?
Look, you're right on one thing. Entrepreneurs are the ones who are going to change the world. And you can see the recent trends, right? And I think the whole trend started very much in the 90s. Um, Steve Jobs, I mean, you see those big mega companies that have come up, right? Google, they've changed the world. Facebook, in many ways. Now, it was based on some form of consensus of, okay, we like those guys, we'll push them, they'll change. Now, if you imagine the multiplier effect that you can have, again, with decentralized finance, for entrepreneurs spread, you know, not everybody has a chance to go and be in the Silicon Valley. But if all those entrepreneurs worldwide, through decentralized finance, digital funding, digital crowdfunding, could be given the same chances, think of the multiplier effect that they could have in their communities, in their world. Why? Because you're powering up their ideas, right? And the only successful businesses, unless when they're imposed to you artificially, are the ones that make a difference in people's life.
I
And
completely agree.
if you make a difference in people's life, it will work. As long as you have integrity, as long as your business is managed transparently, and that's the power of blockchain, and you have a community that supports you and that needs it. It's like the model of Ubuntu Tribe is actually based on the fact that whomever owns the coin has a right to shares in the business.
It's a reward system in a lot of ways, yeah.
Yeah, it's a reward community-based system that ultimately evolves into a decentralized autonomous organization.
So, and you build already the coin. What's the stage on that level for the people that are listening to the interview?
The platform is built, at least from you know, a technology point of view. You know, we starting with one blockchain. We're looking at being you know, at opening up to different other technology. We have partners, you know, mobile, even some also financial institutions. We also have secured significant amount of gold across the continent through contracts, you know, and we're comfortable that by the next few months, by the end of the year, we'll probably have an equivalent to, you know, $500 million of gold supply contracts that will allow people to buy digital gold. We also have a very unique technology that allows African or other miners, because we also have partnership with gold mines in Canada. We're looking at a few others in Latin America and in Asia, right? But we look at a mercury-free mining. And we have a technology that allows artisanal miners or small-scale mine to extract their gold without the use of mercury and increase production by 15 to 25%. So we want to also redistribute wealth across the value chain while providing a clean environment and a clean support. And 5% of our transaction goes back to educate, of transaction fees across the platform goes back to, support social projects, education, healthcare, not only also with those within those communities, but also with the buyers community. And you were saying earlier, talking about the 36 million jobs lost in the in the US, and 1 out of 6 UK citizens living on the back of the government and being needs. So we also keep a portion of the transaction fees to be redistributed from the communities where the transactions were emitted from, so that ultimately those using the blockchain, then you have some funds that you can use to have an impact locally and make a difference. So it's really a systemic approach that we developed based on what Mother Nature has to offer. And that's really where we need to go back to as humans. This is that let's value again what created us and what we live around with, instead of wasting it and put artificial value to it, right? Now, if you can then as a business do that, then you have you're really making a difference, but you're doing good and doing well. And I think that's the model that would actually survive. Because if you're not profitable, you're out. If you destroy your environment or wealth, or just keep it for a very small group, then your own sustainability is at stake. So the real model, and that's why we called our company Ubuntu, is what is the real model that gets humanity to be sustainable, right? So, and from a business point of view, yes, we're doing our STO in a few months, security token offering. And we already are talking to quite a few investors who have started their data room. As you know, I've been in the investment space for 20 years. So, what we really have is that the product is ready to go. And we had a choice. We were supposed to launch in April, May. And we decided that first it wasn't the right time, but it was better to focus on our energy on what we stand for. Hence pushing the Ubuntu Love Challenge. Hence reminding people what makes us human, right? Because there's no point selling products to an extinct civilization.
And just for this part, I would like to, I think it's interesting for our audience and as well to promote, and we'll wrap up in a while. But so in terms of the project, so this is the project that we're talking is the Ubuntu Tribe, the coin and the STO.
Yeah, Ubuntu Tribe, yeah. It's utribe.one.
Okay. Because I think this is very important.
UTRIBE.ONE, utribe.one.
Okay, very interesting. And for instance, this part here, so this is kind of a platform for all Africa. It's going to be based in one country.
It's available everywhere in the world. That's the beauty of internet, right? So anybody in the world will be able to buy a gold-backed digital asset. And we have 2 tokens. We have one that is 100% gold-backed, and we have another one that is an investment product, a tokenized convertible warrant, where you can invest. We use 80% to buy gold and 20% for OPEX, but more importantly, you have a right after 1 year to claim the gold back at a 5% discount for the 80% value that you had. And after 3 years, you can claim it back with a 15% discount. And at the 3-year anniversary, you can decide to claim it back or to convert it into shares of the company. So you have a downside protection in your investment. Why? Because you always have the underlying asset that we keep, and because we expand adoption and usage and then get the transaction fees out of that, then the token is actually traded. So you can actually trade it from day one, right? Or if you don't trade it, you can keep it for a year. And if you're not happy with the performance, you have a downside protection that you can always convert into gold. So those are the two key main products that we have, while we build an environment where people can trade from their phone, which is where we think the world is going.
Oh, very, very interesting, and we'll put information about that during the article. So to wrap up, and I think we passed 1 hour right now and 15 minutes, so more than the 60, but I think it's a very important area in the interview. So in terms of this vision, which I think it's your focus, so this will be, how do you align the Africa 2.0, the Ubuntu Tribe, the U Tribe point one, and the different projects, just to wrap up for people that are listening to you right now?
I would call that as it's lateral thinking.
Okay.
I would, the principles, so most people think in a linear way. I just think that it's just my responsibility is to provide some pieces of the puzzle that each have value, the same way as Africa 2.0 has an Africa focus. Ubuntu Tribe has a focus around more, global prosperity and, international engagement and trade based on real values. The Ubuntu Foundation, which is the larger shareholder of Ubuntu Tribe, has a mission to help raise human consciousness, right? By focusing on investment and thought leadership and advocacy using the initial model of Africa 2.0 in terms of advocacy, but also decentralized investment around the 5 elements. Air, which is basically telecommunications, but also pollution. Water, because that's the next challenge of the planet, right? Fire, which is energy, renewables, etc. Earth, which is regenerative agriculture, nature-based science, and also regenerative mining. And at the center of all that is love as an investment destination and a collaboration destination, and around education, healthcare, culture, and ancestral knowledge.
I love the way you put it. So I think that's fantastic. We will put information about this for the people interested. In order to wrap up, and then cautious that we are close to 1 hour now, so what would be the message that you send to the children that are right now still over there in Africa and other parts of the world that want to follow your steps, but as well to learn all this? Because I think that's quite important, the message of hope, that I think it's part of all your work, but as well that we need to highlight.
I would say, first, to be true to yourself, right? Embrace the power of the collective. And if you believe in something, give it your best for greater impact, not only for yourself, but for everyone around you.
Completely.
More importantly, change is coming, and start being prepared now.
Wonderful. So I think, well, there's a lot of things here. We're going to put all this information about the different initiatives that you are leading. It's been a privilege, and definitely urge people to listen to you and as well to find more about you. So where can people find about you, if you can just highlight from your own voice some of the platforms and websites and social networks that you highlight for people that want to know more about you?
Yes, so I'm mostly active on LinkedIn, I have to say. So Mamadou Toure, you can find me there. Ubuntu Tribe website is www.utribe.one, UTRIBE.one. Africa 2.0 is www.africa2, POINT 0. So the number 2, POINT0.org. Ubuntu Love Challenge is www.ubuntulovechallenge.org. And then the best way to find me is actually by just searching the web and get lost to find yourself.
Oh,
That's
thank you
what.
so much.
Thank
Now
you.
that's amazing, very inspiring. It's been an honor. Thank you so much. I think we'll be the first of a lot of other, but today we wrap up with this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the opportunity.
My honor. Thank you.
Great.